Jim mentioned, we recently hosted CNN at one of our ground stations in New Mexico and then again at NRO headquarters. It's part of the IC's effort to be a little more transparent about what we do for the American public. But like all members of the IC, we take our mission very, very seriously. So the notion that we should be more transparent about who we are and what we do makes a lot of sense. But although we take our mission very seriously, we're not used to talking about it, especially in an unclassified environment. So the drive toward transparency is a big change, particularly for the NRO. We've been around now for about 55 years, but for more than half of that history, we were a black organization. Even the fact that we existed was classified. So going from that kind of history to hosting CNN is a big change. So my ground station team in New Mexico, I called them up and said, you know, you're going to be hosting a CNN crew and doing an interview on the ops floor. And, you know, they're total professionals, so they took it in stride. Well, mostly. I'd like to say that we at the headquarters accepted the fact that we're going to be hosting Jim and the CNN crew without any hesitation at all, but that wouldn't be true. I was a little nervous about doing an unclassified interview with CNN. In the fashion of one of Director Clapper's truisms with a twist from yesterday, you know, it's actions that speak louder than words, unless your words are broadcast on CNN. With the potential that you can say something sufficiently interesting or boneheaded enough to get it played over and over again on CNN. So I was a little nervous, but I knew that I had the NRO team behind me, and for some reason I felt much, much more comfortable as I went in for the interview. Seriously though, Jim and his team were complete professionals through the whole experience, and we did enjoy it. But I will also say that as professionals, they don't pack light. When they showed up for the documentary, they carried about 6 humongous suitcases full of equipment. They had microphones and cameras of all shapes and sizes. As I thought about the specialized tools and equipment that they need to do their documentary, I was thinking it was very similar to what we do for the IC. Applying the right tool or set of tools to get the job done. When it comes to space reconnaissance, it's the job of the NRO to work with our commercial industry partners to develop, acquire, and integrate those right tools in space and on the ground. As this audience knows, NRO systems fly from hundreds to thousands of miles from Earth. They provide U.S. policymakers and warfighters a unique perspective, worldwide reach, and the flexibility only possible through space-based access. Anybody who watches CNN knows that highest interest areas for the community can shift rapidly. Fortunately, the NRO can focus its assets anywhere, anytime, at the speed of tasking. What's more, we can be there until others arrive, and we can stay as long as necessary. We support a wide range of missions, from strategic warning to tactical support to the warfighter. That's what we're known for, but NRO capabilities are also used for general disaster assessment, for FEMA, assisting federal law enforcement agencies, and aiding humanitarian assistance around the world, to name just a few. It's a much more diverse mission set than one we started with 55 years ago. When NRO was established in 1961, we were well into the Cold War. Director Clapper now talks frequently, almost longingly, about those good old days of the Cold War. We had a single adversary in the Soviet Union that we could really focus on and that we came to understand pretty well. And keeping tabs on the Soviets from space wasn't all that hard, at least looking back on it. It involved watching and listening to big, loud things that move slowly. ICBMs, tank divisions, big fixed radars. It was a job we learned to do very well. It was also a job that drove our capabilities and our systems for decades. Our first imagery system was called Corona. During its first mission in space, Corona imaged more of the Soviet Union than all the U-2 flights up to that point combined. Corona demonstrated the power of space-based reconnaissance. By the 70s, we had systems like Hexagon. 55 feet long, it was named Big Bird for obvious reasons. It was very capable. In a single mission, it could image about 80% of the Soviet Union's 7 million square nautical miles of land space. You can see the difference in capabilities in the imagery over time. From the first image taken in 1960, before the NRO was officially formed, to a broad area shot taken in the 80s. And here's a close-up within that same image of Lenin's tomb. And again, this is more than 30 years old. These are some of the systems and the products from our past that have now been declassified. We're very proud of that history. Corona, Hexagon, and all the others were innovative, mission-driven systems that did their job extremely well. They were technical marvels in their day. But while we're proud of those systems and that heritage, we are not defined by it. A lot has changed since then in targets, in threats, and the opportunities available to us in the commercial marketplace. The NRO has adapted to that change, and we're still adapting to ensure we stay ahead of both targets and threats, and to ensure we take full advantage of the opportunities the commercial marketplace is bringing to us. So a lot has changed since 1961. But what hasn't changed is the power of space-based reconnaissance in understanding the hardest targets and in penetrating denied areas. What also hasn't changed is the NRO's commitment to develop innovative, mission-driven systems. And because of the broader diversity of the missions today's NRO supports, those systems we build and buy are a much more diverse set than they were back in the 60s or the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s. Let me talk for a minute about that diversity. You know, when people think of NRO space systems, they think typically of large, complex, and capable. They think hexagon-sized space systems. Well, we still build, with our commercial industry partners, those types of systems. You know, if you want to see very small targets and be able to characterize them, or if you want to hear very faint signals from hundreds of thousands of miles away from the Earth, you need big sensors. Big sensors drive big systems. And in fact, if you want to combine sensitivity with persistence, you need even bigger systems, bigger sensors. So some missions still require those big bird type systems, but other targets demand a very different approach. Some missions, for example, drive small distributed systems flying low. We develop those systems as well. Yes, the NRO does small. Now, I was asked a question recently at a forum like this one about why the NRO had walked away from CubeSats. And the question made me smile. The questioner knew that the NRO had been very involved in the beginning of the CubeSats and wondered again why we had left them behind. And my answer was that we haven't left them behind at all. We used to use them just for technology and demonstrations, and we launched them for others. But now we're using them for actual mission applications, which is why you hear less about it, because they're missions that we can't typically talk about in unclassified forums. So we build systems big and small, at every size in between, depending on what's required to do the mission. What also might surprise you is that we do more systems on the small end of that spectrum than on the large. We also leverage what's commercially available for our space systems. Everything from using commercial buses to support a unique payload, to adapting commercially available systems to do a unique intelligence mission. We're exploring commercially available manufacturing techniques like 3D printing for mission performance with improved affordability. We're exploring systems and techniques for very different applications and industries for their applicability to our overhead reconnaissance mission. In short, we're tapping into that innovations that made a hexagon system possible more than 30 years ago to ensuring we take max advantage of everything that industry is offering us today. Innovative mission-driven space acquisition is still what we do, with acquisition defined as everything from a straight-out commercial buy to a unique development that challenges the laws of physics. I'll do a quick shout out here to Ms. Darlene Minnick, She is the outstanding officer that leads the innovation going on in my GEOINT space systems today at NRO. So as cool as Darlene is, and as cool as our space systems are, especially the wide variety of space systems we build and buy today, the magic is really on the ground. And I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing on the ground side. You know, back in the days of Corona, through the days of Hexagon, until fairly recently, we focused on optimizing each space system for the job it had to do. Each of our space systems was tethered to a unique ground terminal and ground infrastructure that was developed and optimized for it uniquely. The NRO and our industry partners built magnificent stovepipes from space through the ground terminal and into the ground infrastructure. And we did this for every program in the NRO. That approach worked well in the past. In fact, we didn't have a choice. The commercial marketplace didn't support what my systems needed in terms of speed, throughput, and processing power. We had to build it for ourselves. That's not true today. And it's not the effective way or the affordable way for me to function today or into the future. Commercial IT has caught up. It can support most of what I need. And today's mission imperative demands that I do architecture integration, not individual system optimization. Now, in my view, Stephanie O'Sullivan, the current Principal Deputy DNI, is the best Principal Deputy we've ever seen in the community. Very experienced, very wise. She somehow manages to speak very loudly with a very small voice. Stephanie often tells us that we can no longer outspend all our adversaries. We must be better at integrating our capabilities and applying those integrated capabilities against the hard intel problems. And she's absolutely right. We need this improved integration across intelligence disciplines and domains. But you have to start somewhere, and the NRO is starting by building a ground that uses our entire space architecture to best effect, as well as allowing us to combine the multi-int space effects with other domains, air, sea, ground, and cyber, to go after those hard intel problems. We've already taken the first steps. The old program-centric stovepipes have been cut. Transport and ground systems are now horizontal enterprise approaches supporting that entire space architecture. We're taking full advantage of the advances in the private sector, faster communications and processing, new materials and nanotechnologies, data encryption, transport, and storage. These advances are fueled by the incredibly dynamic IT marketplace, including the miniaturization and manufacturing technologies driven by those IT systems. We anticipate fielding a ground system able to direct appropriate multi-int collection assets against intelligence problem observables, able to rapidly redirect assets for additional collection to improve our knowledge, and able to learn and adapt from what is collected, all before any human being sees what's happening. Imagine a ground architecture able to move at machine speeds to notice the unusual hidden amongst the host of the usual, to anticipate the next move, not just react to the one just made, and to use all our collection capability to best effect. If it sounds too good to be true or too complex to succeed, it's not. Prototypes are driving operations today. Now, Director Clapper talked about systems like Deep Blue, systems that were pitted against the best of humankind. Well, we're talking about the successors to those systems, with far more at stake than the outcome of a chess game. We must move from this to this. And again, we not only think it's possible, but we're already on our way. The magic really is on the ground, and we're counting on good engineering, not magic, to make it happen. I'd like to give credit to my AS&T team led by Dr. Susan Durham for all their work on Sentient. It's one of the words you see there on the right of the chart that's helped to show us the possibilities. And in fact, Sentient has now racked up enough mission successes that it's helped to prove the case for that kind of ground system. I'd also like to give kudos to my ground lead, Mr. Mike Hale, for taking the lessons learned from Sentient and other groundbreaking ground prototypes to chart the way for our future ground architecture. Mike is actually speaking in tomorrow's closed session. So if you're interested in hearing more specifics than I can give in this forum about what we're up to and how we're involving our ground architecture and how you and your company can get involved, please consider taking that session in. Our traditional industry partners are still absolutely critical to us, and they were part of our past success, and they're going to be part of our future success. But we recognize that we'll need new partnerships if we're going to fully realize our future. New thinking, new ways of doing business, new ways of looking at our problem sets. We've had a long-standing outreach to potential new partners with something we call our Directors Innovation Initiative, or DII. The DII's annual broad area announcement continues to bring revolutionary new ideas to the NRO. It's brought carbon nanotubes, phased arrays, many other technologies. It also brings us new partners. Since we've been doing DII, we've gotten 6,000 proposals from 44 states. And more than 30% of those proposals have come from partners we haven't partnered with before. But we're also trying some new approaches to encourage more new players and more new thinking. For example, we did something called the Prospector acquisition not too long ago. And we announced that not on our traditional sources, but on Facebook and Twitter. And if that wasn't sort of novel enough, we also took a different innovative approach to getting the industry proposals. Instead of the multi-volume written things that you usually give us, we asked industry to respond with a one-page abstract and a 7-minute video. We recently awarded 7 contracts under this Prospector program, and 5 of those 7 were with new partners. So we're going to continue trying new innovative approaches to ensure we're buying, adapting, and developing the best ideas out there. We've talked quite a bit about the way the NRO is fully leveraging everything the commercial marketplace has to offer us. But let me talk now specifically about what we're doing to make sure we take maximum advantage of commercial imagery. We have a lot of interest in the rapidly evolving commercial GEOINT collection capabilities that new companies are offering. Because our interests overlap with our partners at NGA, we have formed a new joint commercial GEOINT activity office, responding to Robert and myself. We believe there's a very exciting future for commercial imagery services, and we want to work together with you to make the smart decisions about how we go forward. The new office is in its infancy, and we're still developing many of the details. But it's a great opportunity for us to take a much more holistic approach and make sure, again, that we're taking maximum advantage of everything out there available to us. And here I'll give a shout out to Jim Martin. We recently got Jim back from USDI, and he's led this activity for us, again, with our partners at NGA. For us, it's a pretty simple proposition. If it's truly a commercially viable, available service that meets our mission needs, it leverages a commercial marketplace, and that makes it cheaper and more affordable for us than anything that we could develop ourselves. So buying commercial, when it meets mission requirements, allows me to do my job more effectively and affordably. It's a win for the NRO and for the U.S. taxpayer, and it's a win for U.S. industry on the world stage. So it just makes sense for us to take full advantage of those commercial services and focus our resources on the things that the U.S. government needs that are not commercially viable. That is true of commercial imaging and commercial buses and commercial IT and every other commercially available product and service we're already discussed and that we're already leveraging. Pundits have noticed the popularity of movies like The Martian and Gravity and all the new developments in the commercial marketplace, and they've declared that space is cool again. It's a little surprising to me because I thought space was always cool. And I've always recognized the advantage it provides the U.S. And on that note, I'll mention one other focus area for the NRO, and that is helping the DoD in its third offset strategy. Although DoD has increasingly used NRO assets to support wartime operations, this new strategy will require us to up our game. We must be survivable, and we must be tactically responsive. We will be survivable. Like our partners in the Air Force, we are taking every measure to make sure we can survive the threats that are known, that we've seen demonstrated, and those we project. And we're practicing those capabilities, tactics, and techniques in the JICSPOC, again, with our Air Force partners. And we will be tactically responsive. We are working closely with DoD to develop the new responsive concepts and capabilities that will be required. Like every mission we support, success in supporting the third offset strategy will require new innovative thinking and strong teaming with our partners in industry and in government. So recent developments within the GEOINT industry, within the broader commercial industry, have been nothing short of incredible. Our job is to apply that revolution and capability in combination with other ints and other domains against the explosion we've seen in both targets and threats. And that is exactly what we intend to do. I could go on, but I remember something that Director Clapper said more than once, that speakers from Washington, D.C. really need no introduction. What they need is a conclusion. So I'll just conclude by thanking Jim once again for being here, thanking Jeff Harris and the whole GEOINT team for making this possible for all of us, and thanking all of you for listening. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Yep.
The corollary to that, I think, is Winston Churchill said, "Be clear, be brief, be seated." That was
exactly right.
But I'm a TV guy. I never listened to that. Thanks very much. So I think I'm supposed to stand here and you there as I direct the grilling from the audience at you.
Yeah.
I just got the cards, so I'm going to actually ask you one of my own questions first while I search for the brilliance in here. You talked just then about the explosion, in your words, in threats to space assets. A short time ago, I interviewed just had a conversation with General William Shelton, former director of Space Command. And he said it's his impression that this is a space war the U.S. is losing, that it's falling behind threats, particularly from China, but also Russia. And I wonder if you dispute that. I'm sure you dispute it, but tell us why you dispute that characterization.
I think we were slow to recognize the change. I think we've been very good at catching up. So, you've got what you've got in space. You can't react to that immediately, but we've got new techniques, tactics, procedures to make sure we can react to the threats we've seen demonstrated. And we've got lots of plans for the future, and the future is started measuring next year to make sure we can take on all the threats that we project. So we will be survivable. And I think the adversaries recognize the importance of space to the U.S., not just for intelligence, but for everything we do in normal life, including the banking transactions that we all count on. So we have got to make sure it's there for all of us. And certainly we've got to make sure it's there for Intel.
Perhaps apropos of the challenge, but also perhaps of our visit to ADF Southwest, I have a question here from an audience member. In a time when our technological advantage is shrinking to such state actors as China, why does NRO or the IC need more transparency?
I think transparency in terms of our mission and what we try to do for the U.S. and the U.S. people is extremely important. I think if we don't talk about it, they make assumptions that are absolutely not in keeping with what we're actually trying to do. Is he wearing pink socks? Is he really? It's nice. So I think it's important to say what we can say. I think it's also important to make sure we protect the things that we need to protect, so that things that are known to the American public are known to every adversary out there for us. So we can't go too far in what we tell them, but we can certainly tell them about how much we care about, again, supporting the mission that supports them.
Okay, so a money question here. The competition trend to save money towards low-price technology acceptable, LPTA, for the past several years has caused a severe knowledge draw from the NRO. Is this trend finally over? Well, I wonder if you agree with the premise first, but...
I don't.
Okay.
I don't think we've ever used LPTA. For those of you who don't know that acronym, it's lowest price technically acceptable. So it says anybody who sort of passes the technology threshold or the tech threshold, you're just going for lowest price. And we have tended not to do that in any of our acquisitions. And we don't plan to do that in the future. So we try to hire the best. That doesn't mean that we want to pay more than we have to for it. So we're doing more in the way of competitions. We're certainly looking at some of the new providers out there and what they might offer to us. But we certainly want to make sure we still got the best minds and the best technologies trained on what we need to do.
This is a topic you've talked to me a lot about when we've spoken before, but applications for the warfighter, as I referenced earlier. But here, timely space situational awareness is important. What is the NRO role with the U.S. Air Force?
Air Force and the NRO do very different space missions. So we do intelligence, and they do everything from GPS to weather to missile warning. Again, very different missions. We both have a need to get that information to those who need it as soon as possible. You know, we actually did a little film on our support to Desert Storm recently, and it was the most watched film we've ever released on our website. And one of the quotes in that film, this was before the NRO sort of caught on to tactical timelines. One of the quotes from that film was someone asked General Schwarzkopf, who was sort of leading the activity for the U.S., about the contribution of national systems. And he said, "What?" And so he didn't even know that we were playing. And again, most of the time we weren't relevant to him. So we really took that to heart, and we have really, really changed the way we go about things. So delivering information to, especially the warfighter, on their systems and all the way out to the tactical edge is something we have taken very, very seriously. And we continue to improve both the timeline and the relevance of the information and make sure it's integrated in their other info systems.
Well, one follow to that, just we've been delving into our own project on threat to space assets, the response. There's a lot of talk, I don't know how much of it is idle out there, but an overdependence on space assets, right? And not just whether you're talking about an individual warfighter, but the Navy, intelligence, et cetera, and that our enemies know of that dependence, and therefore, of course, developing weapons to target it. Is there enough, is there an overdependence, do you think, in your view? Have we become, in your space, so enthralled by technology that if those assets were ever lost or damaged or threatened, would the U.S. military be crippled?
I think the U.S. military would definitely be disadvantaged, and I'm not sure I'd ever say you're overly dependent on space. In fact, I'd like them to be more dependent on space. But we have to make sure it's survivable. The U.S. doesn't have and can't afford the kind of numbers that you'd have to make up in either people or weapon systems to make up for the space advantage. And we couldn't afford it if we could. So space is a real multiplier. And again, I think what we need to focus on, the military did some days without space, and it was ugly. They didn't want to go back there. And we've had the same question asked from some of our foreign partners. We can't afford the alternative. So we have to make sure, again, that we are making space survivable, and that it's going to do what the military and what the policymakers are counting on for it to do when we're threatened.
I have a question just handed in. Please briefly explain the importance of lambda D. Do I have that right? Lambda/D?
I have no idea.
Does that ring a bell?
Nope.
Okay.
What? Oh. Yeah. Again, we get, I'll talk a couple things. There's a lot of debate about big systems, especially when you talk resilience. Are the big systems more vulnerable than smaller systems, smaller proliferated systems? And our answer is no. In fact, we've done a lot of studies. So small systems, you've got bigger numbers, but they're not that hard to target, and they can't protect themselves usually. So that's one answer. And the other answer is that you want resilience, but you want it to actually have a mission capability. So having something up there that's extremely survivable but doesn't do the job you need it to do isn't very helpful. Having something that's really optimized for the job, it's not survivable, isn't very helpful either. So you need to find that balance between. And again, as Jeff points out, sometimes you need a big front end for it to do the job it needs. And you can't put a big front end on a very small system. So again, finding that balance between what it needs to do the mission and then making sure that mission capability is very resilient no matter what the threat. That's a job we're trying to do today.
And just to the audience, be aware if you do have more questions, please feel free to send them up. Here's another from the audience. What are the opportunities and challenges for NRO to embrace COTS, commercial solutions?
Well, I talked a lot about that. We're embracing COTS all over the place. I used to build a lot of support systems again myself. We buy most of that now commercially. We used to buy and develop hardware, processing hardware ourselves. We buy all that commercially. We used to develop our own buses for each individual spacecraft. We now buy a lot of that commercially. So we use and leverage the commercial marketplace much more than we ever have in the past. There are still some things we need to do uniquely, again, to support our mission set. And even that, we don't build anything at Westfields. We do that job as well with commercial industry. So whether it's COTS or whether it's custom, whether it's unique, we do all of that with commercial U.S. industry.
This goes to the issue of education. Given your need for scientists and engineers, how are you doing attracting the best STEM-educated workforce?
That's a great question, and it lets me talk about something that's been a big change for us. You know, again, the NRO has been around for 55 years, and for 54 years of that history, we have not owned a single person. We've always borrowed people from other agencies and from the DoD. Last year, for the first time, we actually got a small portion of our total workforce that does belong to us. So that's the first time we're really going to be responsible for recruiting actively, for training, for educating our folks. We've always done that with our borrowed workforce. We probably support more advanced degrees for military officers and for others that, again, come to the NRO for assignments than almost anybody else in the government. Because we need those folks. But now we have a chance with this, we call it the NRO DoD cadre, to really recruit the talent that we need from school and really shepherd it and make sure that, again, that they're going to have the skills we need for the long term and a little more stability in a portion of our workforce.
This is a question, again, from the audience, but gets to certainly a fascination of mine and one that you referenced in your comments, this just CubeSats, et cetera. But the question is, how will the proliferation of small sats affect the NRO mission overall?
I think it offers us some opportunities. I mean, CubeSats, smaller satellites, combined with affordable launch. That is a huge enabler for us. There are some missions that have never been affordable in the past that we can now afford to go after. Again, with small satellites with affordable launch. There are fleeting requirements that we can now afford to go after that we've never been able to go after in the past. So there have been mission sets from our mission partners, things that they really need us to do that have never been above the line for funding. They were just too expensive to chase. And with smaller satellites, more affordable launch capability, they're in the realm where we can actually go chase those opportunities, and it's exciting for us.
Can you go into more detail about what kind of missions we're talking about?
Yeah.
I like the way you answered those questions. Yeah. I've asked you many questions where you've given me a smile and a nod. A few more from the audience here. Let's see. How is the NRO transition to ICITE going? You'll have to explain to me what that acronym is.
So we call it eyesight because we have an acronym for everything. But that is has really been one of the real initiatives from Stephanie O'Sullivan and the IC writ large. But the idea is to have a common backbone of IC, IT, that would allow us not only to talk to each other a little bit better, but to have more commonality across the community. And so that is the infrastructure that all our stuff rides on. So we are huge proponents of eyesight. It's already given us better connectivity than we've ever had before in the community. We all have different jobs to make eyesight happen. We're well on the way to ours, but then we're leveraging the total effect that eyesight will have. So that ground architecture I showed you for our future, that rides on eyesight.
You could always tell an outsider when they mispronounce acronyms, and there I am, eyesight. This gets to the third offset, which you referenced in your comments. Said that there was talk yesterday about the importance of R&D in the third offset. How does NRO R&D move from invention to flight?
We've had a strong R&D program for our entire history. We put a lot of money into R&D. And I think we have probably a better transition rate for R&D into operations, into development programs than others may have. So we take that very, very seriously. The question now is how we direct that to this new mission area for us. So it's something, again, that Jim Martin is kind of focusing on for us. We see a lot of potential here. Again, we talked about maybe over-reliance on space. We think the military, to do what it needs to do against the near-peer adversaries, actually needs to be more reliant on space. We'd like them to be more reliant on us. And to do that, we need to make sure they know we will be there for them and that we can train and practice with them. So we're very focused on that for the future.
Can I ask you just to characterize the threat today to space assets, and who is your greatest concern?
I think, we have threats we've seen. We've certainly seen lasers and jammers from Earth. So we've seen those demonstrated not just by China and Russia, but by others. I mean, you can buy jammers on the internet. So we know we have those to worry about. We certainly saw the Chinese demonstrate their direct ascent weapon in 2007. And we've seen plans for many, many other things. So we worry most about the Chinese and the Russians. It'd be a hard call to say who amongst those two we're most worried about, but we're worried about both, and their systems and capabilities are different, so we have to plan against both. So again, we've atrophied a little bit in terms of our ability to not only understand the threats, but react to those threats. We've lived in a very benign environment space for a while, so we haven't had this kind of threat since the Soviet Union days. So sort of retraining and relearning those skills is what we're very, very focused on. We have something happens to you in space, us operators tend to look at, well, the space system is misbehaving. It's an anomaly. And now we need to consider that maybe somebody's doing something to me. That's not a question that my operators ask today. Or it's not a question that they used to ask. They do ask it today. So we need to retrain people. And certainly we need different training than we've ever given our operators and our system developers. And we're working on that again in partnership with Air Force and Stratcom and everybody else who's in this fight with us.
You mentioned the Chinese launch in 2007. The follow-on, this Russian launch with the rocket stage that came alive, right? Mm-hmm. The maneuverable satellite, or people use the term kamikaze satellite. How advanced is that technology today, and how much of a threat?
Yeah, I think we worry about direct ascent weapons. We worry even more about things that can go after us that are already in space, because the timelines are different.
Yeah.
So we worry about all of it. And again, we're taking measures against all of it. Right. We understand the timelines. We understand what we have to do.
I feel like I'm verging towards one of those smile and nod answers.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a time to move on to a question from the audience. Let's see.
How
are you addressing affordable launch?
Well, fortunately, the NRO is not in charge of launch, and I have never been so glad about that except for the last couple of years when it's been the point of interest to so many, especially on the Hill. We buy through the Air Force. So we have been, we're partners with certainly ULA and the ELV. They've done a great job for us. We have bought launches from SpaceX. They're a partner for us. And we're watching everybody else who's trying to come into that game. We worry about it too. I mean, we look at national security launches and there are ebbs and flows in that. So what supports several providers during one of the uppers doesn't support as many providers as we go into a trough. So those providers have to count on not just national security space business, but they have to count on commercial, and they have to count on that world commercial market. And that's not an easy marketplace. So we are watching those developments like we're watching commercial imagery. We want to take full advantage of whatever comes out there. Certainly SpaceX has done us all a favor by sort of challenging not only what's done, but the way it's done. I think when they first started, there was nobody who grew up in the launch community that looked at that design and thought it would work. You know, who strings 9 small engines together on a rocket and uses that for their core design? And not only worked, it worked very well. So again, they challenged a lot of the thinking and a lot of the conventional wisdom that was in the launch community, and they did it with great success. So that's the kind of behavior I want from all my folks, and again, we want to make sure that we're ready to accept new partnerships when they prove themselves.
So we're down to just our last 3 minutes here, so I thought I might leave a big picture question for you. Again, this is from the audience. What's your biggest challenge? What's the thing that, I always phrase it as what keeps you up at night, but.
It is making sure we're going to be resilient. And I think, we are very, very focused on that, but we can't know what we don't know. And again, we want to make sure we understand all the threats that might come against us and the timeline they're on, and make sure we're ahead of that timeline. So if there's something that causes me pause, it is that, making sure we're going to be ready.
Just a follow-on, I will add to that, because we still have a couple minutes, but in the cyber realm, I'll often hear from cyber experts, both inside and outside government. They are concerned. They're very much aware of the threat. They know where it's coming from. They have a sense of what to do. They will often complain that urgency is not matched by some of their civilian counterparts, right? Or the folks who are writing the checks, et cetera. And I'm curious, is that the same on this threat to you? Do you get the support you need? Do you think that folks in Washington understand?
Yeah, I really do. If there's something that's gotten White House attention and leadership attention throughout the Pentagon, it's been resilience in space. So it's, as we stood up the JIGSPOC now, we've had SecDef, DepSecDef, National Security Advisor. We've had a host of visitors that have showed the kind of interest required to travel out and see that, and they haven't just touched base with it, they have stayed for hours and understood what we were doing and how far we had to go. They've supported, you can tell it's a priority when the money actually follows. And for this kind of budget environment, for us to spend literally billions on both sides, on the IC side and the DoD side, toward additional resilience is a huge, huge investment, and a sign that it's a huge priority for the U.S.
How about in the next administration? Can you build a wall in space? That one I knew I'll get worse than a nod. I'll get worse than a nod.
That's we have a really, really tall wall. Yeah.
Betty Sapp, thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody.